Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here on this call and taking time out of your day. We are here for our Business at its Best seminar on managing your reaction. I'm Dawn Johnson. I am the Chamber's newest teammate and Vice President of Partner Services. I've been here, about 7 weeks now, I think, or finishing up my 8th week. And I have over 19 years of chamber experience in a role very similar to this in West Michigan is where I came from. I'm very excited to be part of the Bowling Green Chamber, and I've been meeting so many people virtually that I'm hoping I don't run into people at the grocery store and go, I think you look familiar because I saw you on Zoom or something like that. And I can't wait to meet everyone in person. And like I said, very much looking forward to that. So a few housekeeping rules today. I want to make sure you know this is being recorded, so please keep your mics on mute for the duration of the presentation. If you have questions, they can be submitted via the chat window. You can see an example of that on the chat window that Katie just submitted. And there will be a Q&A portion at the conclusion of the presentation where we will read your submissions and your questions for Greg Coker to answer. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge our sponsor, Graves Gilbert Clinic, and they are the title sponsor of Business at its Best series. And for those of you that know, sponsors are the ones that help make things happen with our events. So I am going to let Katie cue up a short little video that they have provided for us.
Graves Gilbert Clinic, their top priority is the health and safety of their patients, employees, and visitors. And because of that, Graves Gilbert Clinic is now offering telehealth visits, which allows patients and physicians to use an app to communicate via video chat. Any patient who would like to schedule a telehealth appointment is encouraged to call their Graves Gilbert Clinic physician's office directly, or call the Graves Gilbert Clinic telehealth hotline at 270-746-5790.
Right. Well, thank you, Katie. We had that great audio.
Yeah.
That was awesome. All right. Thank you. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Greg Coker. He is the founder of the Cathedral Institute, a full-service leadership development and consulting firm focused on empowering people, building teams, transforming organizations, and changing the world. Because we need more change right now, I'm sure. Yeah, the need to learn how to deal with it. He is the author of Building Cathedrals, Power of Purpose, and travels the country delivering the keynote speech and conducting workshops based on the principles of leadership, employee engagement, culture, and purpose, the focal point of his book. He and his wife, Nikki, have 2 teenage children, Will and Abby, and live in Franklin, Kentucky. So Greg, we appreciate you partnering with us on this today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great, Dawn. Katie, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks for the intro. Some things have changed since then. I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky now. So our kids are here, and we made the move back here. I went to Western and from Franklin, Kentucky, and we made the move back in October. So it's a honor, a privilege to be back in Bowling Green, beautiful Bowling Green, in this 10-county South Central Kentucky region. The Bowling Green Chamber hosts and leads the economic development. This presentation is under the umbrella of my organization called GregCokerDevelopment.com. The Cathedral Institute is a subsidiary of that, but it's under the umbrella of what I call organizational health. Healthy organizations are the ones that are thriving, like the Bowling Green Chamber and Scott Murphy Daniel and Graves Gilbert and all the great companies out there. And I appreciate you all being on this call. My 3 values, these have been my values, and I'm sure yours too, for a long time. But, after this coronavirus and the COVID-19, these unprecedented times that we find ourselves, these values have really been magnified in my life. The re-engagement, the reinvention, the recommitment. I've always been an engaged person, I'm sure, like you all. However, after this COVID-19 and what we find ourselves in, I've had to re-engage. And it's almost gone from, at the very beginning, from survive to now thriving. And the great companies out there and the great leaders like they're on this call, you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't a great leader, because there are a lot of other folks there's nothing wrong with hunkering down. I mean, we all hunker down, but at some point you've got to get yourself back up. And obviously you all have done that for the last 2 or 3 months. So I've had to re-engage as a husband, as a father, as a community member here in Bowling Green, Warren County, as a church member, recommit. Had to recommit to my clients, recommit to my family. I sent flowers to a client in Louisville a couple of weeks ago. I've never sent flowers to a client before. You know, and the client called me, he says, Greg, he said, it made our day. We smelt those flowers in our conference room all day long. And quite frankly, he said, you know, we've been pretty depressed around here. He even said, he goes, you know, my dad was a big he wasn't a florist by profession, but he loved flowers. He said, I smelled my dad all night long. You know, so I've had to recommit to what I do and to the people that I serve and thank them. And then the reinvention, I've had to reinvent who I am. Had to reinvent how I provide the services. I'd never did a Zoom call before, you know, and after, you know, sort of hunkering down and in that sort of fetal position for the first 2 or 3 weeks of saying, you know, I prayed a lot, as I'm sure you all did. God, you know, put a protective shield around my family, and he did. But at some point I had to say, you know, what can I do to reinvent Greg Coker? So those are my 3 values. I'm sure they're probably yours too. Feel free to use those all you want. I start every workshop with an action plan. Now, I'm a pretty responsible person, but if my name does not get on an action plan, the odds of it getting accomplished are slim to none, and Slim just left the auditorium. So, you know, if you're an owner of a business, then you may have 3 of these action plans a day. One for your organization. You know, if you've got teams that report to you or that you're part of, that might be the second action plan. Of course, everyone on this call should have an individual action plan. And hopefully, as a result of me going through some of these models and some of these concepts, you've got a couple of those action plans on there. So, you know, give you a couple seconds right now to go ahead and write those down on your paper. It's a simple action plan. You know, project management gets a little bit overwhelming to us. Project management is nothing more than the what, the me, the when. You know, now this, and I'm minimizing a little bit. I mean, it's complex, but that in its truest sense is a project management. What am I going to do? Who's going to do it? And when will I get it accomplished? So I'm going to reference several books on the call today. I used to not be that big of a reader. I'm an author. I tell people I'm an accidental author. I was hired by a great leader and fired by a great manager. And had I not been fired from corporate America, I'd have never been forced to write a book. I wrote 3 books. You know, I've studied motivation all my life. The greatest motivator is fear. The greatest motivator is fear. You know, and you know, during this COVID-19, there's been a lot of fear out there. You know, fear about feeding our family and surviving. Well, guess what? That's a motivator to start saving money and start making sure that you can provide. But I've started to read a lot more during this last 2 or 3 months. I'm convinced, I'm an optimist. I'm convinced there'll be more good that comes out of this COVID-19 crisis than bad. Now, I'm not minimizing, it's bad stuff out there, but there's going to be more good than comes out of it than the bad. There's going to be some mediocre supervisors, and I'm not saying that disparagingly. There's going to be some mediocre leaders who, as a result of this crisis, have stepped up to their companies and come out of this excellent leaders. And the 3 or 4 books I'm going to reference, the book Traction. If you've not bought that book, go buy it. I work with a company called Boyd Cat. It used to be Wayne Supply. Monty Boyd's a good friend of mine. Monty Boyd turned me on the book Traction. They've changed their culture at Wayne Supply now. Boyd Cat on the book Traction is phenomenal. The second book is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. Your homework assignment, hopefully your homework assignment is to buy these books, but if for sure your homework assignment is to Google Simon Sinek TED Talk. First, Start With Why. It's the #2 most downloadable TED Talk in the history of TED Talks, which they've been around now for about 10 years or so. He talks about start with why. And I'm going to talk about that golden circle here in a few seconds. The 4 Disciplines of Execution, 4DX, phenomenal books. I'm a pretty disciplined person, but this gives me a model to be even more disciplined. If there's ever been a time to start with why and look at how our company can gain traction and to be disciplined, it's now. And then the oldie but goodie, the good to great, the bus metaphor, get the right people on your bus. That's recruitment. Get the right people in the right seat. That's alignment. Get the wrong people off your bus. But do it with self-esteem in place. There's a right way and a wrong way to get people off your bus. And we'll talk about that. The other 3 books I'll mention, if you have trouble sleeping, read these. They'll put you to sleep in a heartbeat. I'm on my 3rd book. The latest is Healing the Wounds, Forgiveness and Reconciliation in the Workplace. I hope Mike Murphy's on. The Scott Murphy Daniel is the epitome of a good to great company. And we're going to be with the chamber sometime in June. And that's going to be the keynote topic that I'm going to talk about. It's healing the wounds, forgiveness, and reconciliation in the workplace. During this COVID-19, I think there's no greater time to give back. There'll be time for us to make money. And not that we're not making money as a company. We're capitalists. We're Chamber of Commerce. We've got to make money. That's the American way. But there's also opportunities to give back. And the way I've been giving back is I put all 3 of these books on my website, free downloads. You don't have to buy these books for $20 like you used to. Go to my website. You can download all 3 of them. So those are a few books I'm going to talk about. Let's talk about change. Change leadership. We typically hear change management. Well, guess what? It's management and leadership, not management or leadership. Warren Bennis said that most organizations are overmanaged, underled. He didn't say you should manage an organization. You got to manage it, but you also got to lead it. Now, you manage change, but you also should be leading change. So how do we change leadership there? How do we maintain that traction during COVID-19? And there's some dynamics of change. Now, typically, if we were in a live workshop, I'd have everybody stand up, find a partner, look at each other for 30 or 40 seconds without talking, makes you feel uncomfortable. Then I'll have you turn your back, change 3 things, turn back around. The reason I do this exercise, it really magnifies the dynamics that we feel during change. And that's the whole theme of this workshop, is we've got to be cognizant of the emotions of the employees that work for us, that we work with, that we work around. We've got to be cognizant of our family members, the change that our families are going through. So let's talk about these emotions of change, the 7 dynamics of change. Now you see 6 on the screen. I'm going to cover the 7th one in just a few seconds. But these are the emotions of change. Number 1, during change, people will feel awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious during change. How many out there during all these changes your companies have gone through have felt awkward, have felt ill at ease, and self-conscious during these changes? I see everybody raising their hand right now. We all have. Well, guess what? The key here as a leader is to say, guess what? I feel the same way. To stand up and say, folks, we're going to change some things. We've got to change some things. We've got to re-engage, recommit, reinvent. And this is going to cause some changes. So guess what? You're naturally going to feel awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious. Guess what? That's okay. I'm not going to beat you up over it. I'm going to feel awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious. See, I think very often as leaders, we feel like we've got to put this mask on, that we've got to be in control, but we've also got to be human and be real. If there's one thing that's happened with these Zoom calls, I've had leaders, CEO of major companies on a Zoom call, and all of a sudden his little 5-year-old daughter comes and jumps on his laps and they start loving on each other. That's beautiful. I've had cats and dogs jump on screens. For the first time, I think we're starting to lay back a little bit to realize, guess what? I may be the CEO of the company or your manager or whatever, but guess what? I'm feeling the same thing. Number 2, people will focus on what they have to give up versus what they have to gain. Now, I used to be in sales. I wasn't a very good salesperson, but I remember my sales manager used to always say, Greg, features and benefits. You've got to sell features and benefits. Well, guess what? During change, your folks are going to think about what they have to give up. I can't go to the office. I don't have access to this. I can't do this. We can't travel. Well, guess what? You're right. But guess what we have to gain? You've got opportunities at home to read these books you've been wanting to read, to spend more time with your family, to take that nap that I take a nap every day. I get up early, I work late, but guess what? About 2:30 or 3 after this call, I'm going to take me a nap. Well, guess what? That's the flexibility I have now. Your people are going to focus on what they have to give up versus what they have to gain. You've got to sell features and benefits. You've got to be that optimist. Number 3, people will feel alone even though everyone else is going through the same changes. How many out there think you're the only ones hunkered down your house and that you're trying to rearrange your bedroom to an office? But guess what? You get everybody on a Zoom call and you're like, I'm going through the same thing. How many have not, you've run out of things to eat, not run out of things, but you're thinking, we had pizza last night, we're having burgers tonight. And guess what? Misery loves company sometimes. And your people feel isolated. And during this change, especially with COVID-19, you've got to be creative. Zoom calls. How many have had social hour on the weekend with Zoom, with your family? That's creative because people are feeling alone. We've got to get people together. People can only handle so much change. Number 4, an elephant can be eaten one bite at a time. But very often we give our employees 15 things we're going to change. We overwhelm them. What I suggest is to break them down into 3s. To say, folks, we're going to change a lot during this COVID-19. We've got to. But it basically boils down to employee development, facilities, and our alumni here at Western Kentucky University. Now, those are 3 broad changes, but it's a lot more productive than saying, here's 17 things we've got to focus on today. You're overwhelming your people. People can only handle so much. And a lot of people right now out there, almost their wits end. Number 5, people are at different readiness levels for change. I like change. My wife may like it a little bit, but after a while, she's going to get more overwhelmed than me. You can't exploit me for liking change in your company, but you can't beat other people up for feeling like they resist change more readily. People are different. And to manage everyone the same, to lead everyone the same, means to lead everyone differently, to customize how you deal with change. Number 6, people will be concerned they don't have enough resources. I don't have enough money. We don't have this. Well, you may not, but guess what? You might, and I would suggest that we challenge our folks to, guess what? Think outside the 9 dots. Now, I know you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I've done this 1,000 times. Well, guess what? Do it again. Because I've done it 1,000 times and I've been so programmed. At 55 years old, I've been so programmed to stay inside the 9 dots. To color inside the lines, Greg, at 3 years old. Nice job, Greg. You stayed inside the lines, which guess what? You've got to stay inside the lines on safety in your company, on the mission, on those values. But very often, you've got to think outside the 9 dots. So your exercise right now on a sheet of paper you have in front of you is connect all 9 dots using just 4 straight lines without lifting your pen or pencil or without retracing any of the lines. Connect all 9 dots using just 4 straight lines without lifting your pen or pencil or without retracing the lines. Now, I'll give you a few seconds, but if you're like me, I teach this stuff, and if I didn't have this on a PowerPoint, guess what? I'd almost forget how to do it. The only way you can be successful in doing this is, guess what? Go outside the 9 dots. I'll do it for you again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And during this COVID-19, during the change we're going through right now, we have to encourage our folks to be creative, to think outside those 9 dots. The churches out there are leading the creativity. Your companies out there are leading the creativity. Now, there are certain things you never get outside the 9 dots on. Your safety culture, your mission, things that going to the church. It's not a church. This is not a religious presentation, but I love studying churches. Churches can be creative and start having coffee and donuts and praise and worship music, etc. That's awesome. But there's certain things they never compromise on. There's certain things they stay inside that 9 dots all the time, and we've got to. Same as your company. There's certain things you never compromise, but are you challenging your folks? And this goes back to number 6 dynamic, is they're going to think they don't have enough resources. We've got to challenge them to think outside the 9 dots. And then lastly but not leastly, if you take the pressure off, people will revert back to their old behavior. Now, when we get back to the new normal and whatever that new normal is going to be, and people get back to work and do whatever, that's awesome. My fear, and the clients I work with say, Greg, we've never been communicated with more effectively than the last 3 or 4 months. My boss checks in with me every day. I feel more part of this company. I've worked harder. I've been stronger. Guess what? When we go back to work, my fear is it'll get back to the same old thing. Guess what? As a leader, you better be facilitating your folks asking the question, what's going well? Where have we gotten stuck over the last 2 or 3 months? What do we need to be doing different when we get back to work? Because if you take the pressure off, people are going to revert back to their old behavior. And we're seeing that. I went to Home Depot today. You know, we're going to wear a mask for a while, but we're going to get lazy again, unfortunately. And I'm preaching to Greg Coker. If you take the pressure off, people will naturally revert back to their old behavior. And those are the dynamics of change. So how else do we manage change? You know, as senior managers, especially during change, especially during the crisis we're going through right now, most managers default to their management skills, to their IQ, which is awesome. That's great. To the neocortex part of the brain. That's good. But guess what? What's needed now more than ever is leadership. In addition to managing the business, of course, it's not or, it's and, leadership and management. But what's needed now more than ever is leadership. In addition to managing our business and our Chamber of Commerce, the emotional intelligence, the limbic part of the brain. As I talked about the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, take a look at that YouTube video this afternoon, the TED Talk. He talks about the golden circle. Love the golden circle. What he says is that there's the what, the how, and the why. Most of us start with the what. But what do you do? Well, we're in the construction business. Well, how do you do it? Well, we've got design, build, we got this. Why do you do it? We do it for the economic development of this beautiful area. And that's the great thing about Scott Murphy Daniel and Mike Murphy and those guys out there. That's the great thing about Gerald Printing with Jessica and Barry, who I use. Because I go out there and the first thing naturally they may do is saying, well, here's what we do. We do print design. But what they do is they go and say, Greg, we're in the business of helping you take your business to the next level. Wow. Greg, tell us about the book you wrote. Tell us what you want to achieve out of this brochure we're doing for you. You know, Sam at VidMonster, you know, what do you do? Well, I'm in video production. Well, how do you do it? Well, we got a studio, we do this. Why do you do it? And what Simon Sinek says is people are more motivated by your why than your what. But during a crisis, very often, I go to what? What do you do? Well, I write books and I do training. Well, duh, a lot of people do that. Why do you do it, Greg? And if I think about it, I'm sitting there going, you know, out of my workshops, if one person leaves and can be a better husband, a better wife, a better mother, a better father, a better person in their community, they're going to be a better leader in their company. If I can help one person leave and be a better person in their company, a better leader, more of a leader than a toxic manager in the past, and you got to manage, I'm not talking about management in general, but if I can help her or him go, you know, maybe I need to treat my people differently. You're going to be a better husband. You're going to be a better wife. That's what I do. That's why I do it. What I do is not as motivating as why. And guess what? Simon Sinek uses Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King says, I've got a dream, not I got a plan. He talks about the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers graduated from high school, didn't have any money, started a bicycle shop, but their why was to help men and women with commercial flight. And people followed them down to Kitty Hawk. And they crashed airplanes, blood, sweat, and tears. Your employees are not going to give you their blood, sweat, and tears over your what. I got news for you. They're not going to give me their blood, sweat, and tears over what I do. They're going to do it over the why. And there was a guy named Langley who with the War Department gave him like $50,000, was a lot of money in the 1900s to do the same thing the Wright brothers ended up doing. But guess what? He was motivated more by what? He wanted to be famous. Guess who invented the airplane first, or the commercial airline? The Wright brothers. So you got to ask yourself, where are you? Are you preaching the why in addition to the how and the what? Now, Simon Sinek puts these together, and if you're looking at them on your screen like I'm looking right now, they look like a target. But if you were to put your computer on the floor and look down at them, guess what? It's more three-dimensional. It almost looks like a megaphone of sort. So he talks about the neocortex. The neocortex, and this you may say this is psychology. No, this is actually neurology. The brain has two basic areas, the limbic and the neocortex. The neocortex is language and logic. That's more the what. The limbic is emotions. That's emotional intelligence. That's the why. And people are more motivated by your why, the limbic, than they are the neocortex. You got to have both of them. Now, I've got to ask you as a leader, are you using this as a megaphone? Now, the next slide is not political. I'm a social scientist. I study churches. I study politicians. I study leaders. And I'm a social scientist. But guess what? Probably one of the best examples of someone using the why as a megaphone is George W. Bush. Again, not political. George W. Bush, I think, prior to 9/11, was a decent president, was a good president, a good leader. I think after 9/11, he was a great leader. And the reason is you don't pick history, history picks you. You don't pick history, history picks you. In your organization, you are at the place and time that your organization, the founding mothers and fathers, need for you to be. At the very, if you look at George W.'s mouth up there, the smallest part of that megaphone is the why. That's the leader in you. The middle part is the how. That's your policies. The biggest part of the megaphone are your employees. That's the ones that are out there doing the what, the most important folks. But the key question I ask you as a leader, are you out there with the why? The why hasn't changed. In fact, its need to be magnified has never been more important. By guess who? By you. And that's the key question. As leaders, we need to understand, appreciate, and adapt our leadership approach based on the needs of other people, our employees, our membership in the chamber, our customers out there, our family members. One of my favorite leadership models is called social styles. And this social style model is sort of like a Myers-Briggs, not nearly as academic. I like Myers-Briggs too. I like Fire-OB and DISC model. This is social styles. What it basically says is we tend to look out of all four windows of these worlds. You look out of all four of them, but most folks look out of one or two, maybe more than the other two. You've got drivers, pop, 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 let's go, let's go. You've got to be a driver during this crisis. Analytical, that's the optics. Slow the presentation down a little bit, making sure these are all the 10 things we need to do today. You got to be analytical. Expressive, you've got to be expressive about your company. You got to get excited about what you do, and I know you do. Aimable is likability. That's making sure that you focus on your employees, on other people. And guess what? There's never been a better time and a greater time to make sure you're hitting all four of these during change, during this crisis. The drivers, you've got to make sure you say, bottom line, here's what we're doing this week. They need to hear that. Analyticals, here are the 7 things we need to focus on today. They need that. They're analytical. They need a roadmap. Expressives, you got to let them be, hey, how you feeling out there, Greg? Oh my gosh. Ooh, baby, I'm scared. Okay, let's talk about it. You got to let him be expressive. Let her be expressive. Aimable. Guess what? After the Zoom call with 10 people on your team, and Greg may be aimable, or my wife Nikki's aimable. After the Zoom call, you pick up the phone and call my wife personally. Nikki, how you doing? Hey, I enjoyed having you on the call. Anything I can do for you personally? Because guess what? That's the likability. The top part, driver analyticals, management, expressive aimable's leadership. Driver analyticals, IQ, expressive aimable's EQ. You've got to have all 4 of these right there. And the key question is, if your favorite tool is a hammer, be careful not to treat everybody like a nail. You've got to exercise all 4 of these. You also got to have an accurate assessment of where our organization is right now, where your teams are, and respond accordingly. Teams, organizations, families go through predictable stages of growth. They go through form. When all this COVID-19 started, everybody hunkered down. You were in the form stage. Everything was going pretty standard. All of a sudden, people got house got a little bit small, and then you started storming a little bit. Well, storm's good. That's conflict resolution. It's attacking the issue, not each other. You'll never get to norm unless you go through storm. So now you're in norm. You're starting to develop a little bit of normalities on how we're going to work together. We're still going to get up on time. I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to get in my office. And eventually you start clicking. You're in the perform stage. We're now sitting there going, I get up every morning. I get my coffee. I take the shower. I put a nice dress shirt on. I get in my office. Now I'm clicking. I'm convinced our organizations are going to be more perform when we get back than they were before. But guess what happens the day when we come back, when we get back to the new normal? We go back to form. Automatically, whenever there's a change in team, you go from total transformation back to form. If you hire Greg Coker next week, guess what? You take your team back to form. And then guess what? You get your team back up to perform, and then somebody retires, you go back down to form. So your teams are constantly going through this process. You've got to have an accurate assessment, as I mentioned earlier, of where your teams are. And maybe on your action plan, you might share the form, storm, norm, perform with your team and say, folks, where are we? If we're stuck in storm, is it good conflict? Are we attacking issues? Or are we attacking people? And we've got to make sure that we're attacking issues, not people. So let's talk about stress management, for ourselves and those that are lead. My wife's a flight attendant. And if you fly with my wife, she'll stand up and say, and you've heard it 1,000 times from other people, in the unlikely event there's a decrease in cabin pressure, the oxygen mask will decrease or will drop down. Who do they say to put it on first? Yourself. Who do we want to put it on? To your credit, we want to put it on everybody else. Guess what? During stress management, you've got to take care of you. Now, you're leading other people, but you got to lead you. We got to take care of ourselves from stress management. We also have to make sure we're creating a stress management environment and stress leadership for our employees. So let's talk about stress management. Let's talk about the 7 characteristics of what we call stress-resistant people. Not that they don't go through stress. They do, but they manage stress like you. Shakespeare called these people well-ordered souls. And if you've ever been around Skip Worth here in Bowling Green, Skip does a whole presentation on these 7 characteristics. So the number 1 characteristic of people like you, people like Skip Worth, people like myself, who we have stress, but we manage stress, is number 1 is they take personal control. They're empowered versus overpowered. They have internal control, self-initiated, self-directed problem solving versus external control, waiting on other people. Now, there's nothing wrong with having other people help us out. I have people help me out all the time, but I can't just get in a fetal position and wait forever. At some point, after I got fired from corporate America, guess what? I cried. I was depressed. I had to pick myself up at some point. I had to take personal control. Number 2, people like you and me that are stress resistant, that are those well-ordered souls, they're task involved, they're purpose driven. They have a reason to live. They have a reason to live. There's a great book out there. It's a person to live. Oh, I'll come back to that. I should have never started talking about that book because I knew I was going to forget about the book. I'll come back to that. A Reason to Live, Building Cathedrals versus Laying Bricks. My first book's called Building Cathedrals, The Power of Purpose. And it talks about 3 bricklayers. The first one, what are you doing? I'm laying bricks, totally disengaged. Second one, what are you doing? I'm building a wall, happy about the wall, didn't see the big picture. The third one, what are you doing? I'm building a cathedral. And guess what? Those task-involved folks, we've got to help people build their cathedral, their personal cathedral, and guess what? The company cathedral out there. A person with the why to live. That's the Simon Sinek. Number 3, wise lifestyle choices. Regular physical activity is probably as close to a magic bullet as we'll ever have in modern medicine. That's been research-driven. Modification in lifestyle could prevent or delay 75% of the illness and disease. How many out there have found themselves walking more as a result of this COVID-19? I definitely have. That's number 3. Number 4 is they seek social support. My mother's driving her crazy. We're actually driving from Bowling Green tonight down to Franklin, Kentucky, and we're going to eat at Frosty Freeze. Anybody out there eating at Frosty Freeze in Franklin, Kentucky? We're going to pick up Frosty Freeze. We're going to take it to my mom's house in her backyard on the picnic table because guess what? We need that social support. And that's been a big issue during this quarantine. Boredom, chronic loneliness was risk equated to a 1 pack per cigarette smoking habit a day. Now, if you're a lonely smoker, you're in deep trouble. Brigham Young did a longevity study. And this study basically looked at all of the predictors of longevity, of living to be 90 plus years old. All of these are important, starting at the very bottom: environmental, blood pressure, weight, exercise, et cetera, et cetera. Look at the top 2. Those soft skills, which is based on my second book called Soft Skills Field Manual: strong social interaction, close relationships. And that is number 4, that's social support. Number 5, sense of humor. Humor and laughter stimulate the immune system. It lowers our blood pressure, increases those endorphin levels. It decreases stress levels. We got to start laughing again. Researchers discover that on average, toddlers laugh 400 times per day. Adults only 15 times per day. Anger triples mortality rates. An idea, at our house, we've started having comedy night on Thursday nights. And we watch Caddyshack, Stripes. You know, it's those endorphins, that natural drug. Number 6, religious values. This is not a religious presentation. Dartmouth, Harvard, MIT, I'm not going to read all these to you. They've done studies. Bottom line, people who go to church get out of the hospital quicker. People who pray are sick less often. It's all research-based. I'm going to share, and Katie can send out these PowerPoints. They're yours to use however you want to. Number 7, optimism. The 7th one is optimism. Optimism more is a worldview. Number 5, the sense of humor was more of an emotion. This too shall pass. How many grandparents said that? They all did. Well, guess what? They were basically saying is we've got to be optimistic. You know, after the Great Depression, this too shall pass. After 9/11, it's going to be tough. This too shall pass. We've got to be dealers of hope. You know, Rosie Greer, the great football, used to say, we can't be dealers of dope. We've got to be dealers of hope. And that's what we've got to be. We've got that optimism. I think fear got us into this. Optimism is going to get us out. The growth zone perspective. I love this model here. Where are you? Where are you? I'll be honest, that first 2 or 3 weeks, oh my gosh, I was definitely in the fear zone. And then I started saying, you know, what can I learn from this? Do I need to, that's where my 3 R's came from. It was in the learning zone. I wrote down re-engagement, recommitment, reinvention. And then I got to the growth zone right there. I'm sitting there going, wow, I've done probably 20 Zoom call trainings. I've gotten 4 or 5 articles written. I'm working on an online leadership class, starts in September. It's a 10-week program. That'd have never happened if it wouldn't been for COVID-19. Shame on me. I mean, I should have been doing a lot of these things all along. But guess what? Once I start watching the nightly news, I love Channel 13. I don't say that just because I'm in Bowling Green. At 6 o'clock, I turn on Channel 13. You know, because Gene Burke, and I love hearing the local news. But guess what? At 5:30, if I turn on ABC News very often, I go right back to the fear zone. Now, I've got to be informed, but I can't watch news 24/7. So you got to ask yourself, where are you? Now, guess what? There are certain ships need to be burned. I love this metaphor right here. In the 1500s, Cortez left Cuba, went down to Mexico to invade it. He lands on the shores of Mexico, and he's got about 20 of his ships, his armada. He looks at all of his men and said, guess what? Burn the ships. They looked at him like he's crazy. He goes, what do you mean burn the ships? He goes, we're not going back. You know, failure's not an option. Burn the ships. And metaphorically, I'm asking you in your company, you personally, what ships do you need to burn? You know, in my organization, there's a couple of things. I did a podcast. I enjoyed the podcast. Had someone who was going to invest in my podcast. But once he met with me after we talked about investment, he said, Greg, I'm not going to invest on your company. I'm not going to invest in your podcast. I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, we were excited about it. He goes, well, I'm still excited about it. But guess what? I don't think that's your core business. I think it's something that you enjoy doing. It's fun for you, but it's not your core business. So maybe that was a ship I needed to burn, to be able to focus on the other thing. So the key question during change, it's a great opportunity to look at what do I need to change and leave in my company. That wasn't making any money for the company, or not a lot, but you're spending 10 times more time than I maybe should have been. So traction during change. How do we get that traction? That's based on the book Traction. And this is in closing. It talks about the 6 components of companies like yours that gain traction. And I put a lot into this podcast or in this Zoom call, and I apologize for it. I'd love to come back, love to come to your company. This is just not an advertisement, but I put a lot into this as far as probably too much information. Love to come back. But this is from the book Gaining Traction. And it talks about what great companies do. Successful companies like yours operate with a crystal clear vision that is shared by everyone. That's the why. The key question is everyone in your company share the why. Number 2, they have the right people in the right seats. And that's from the book Good to Great. The right people on the bus, that's recruitment. The right people in the right seats, that's the people component. They have a pulse on their operations by watching and managing a handful of numbers on a weekly basis. That's number 3 in this component, and that's the data and the metrics. My father-in-law passed away a year or so ago, 86 years old. We used to go up there and spend the night with him, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd smell cigarette smoke. I'd go in there and peek, and he was in the kitchen. He was at the kitchen table with an old legal pad, writing down 5 or 6 different things. You know what he was doing? He owned a grocery store, an apartment complex, a couple of farms. He had this number 3 down pat. He had those numbers. The key question, do you have those 3 or 4 numbers, or are you waiting for that quarterly report to look at it and go, oh my God, I didn't know that. Do you have that number 3? The 4th component, they identify and solve issues promptly in an open and honest environment. That's the problem-solving component. What's the culture of your company? Do you have a problem-solving culture where people, if you're going through a funk out there, excuse the French, and someone can say, time out, let's get in the conference room, something ain't going right here. Do you have that type of culture? Number 5, they get everyone on the same page with essential procedural steps, and then they get everyone to follow. That's the process. Do people know your process? They bring discipline and accountability into your organization. That's the execution standpoint. That's number 6. So again, I've crammed a lot in here, but I wanted to give you what you deserve because you're doing great things out there. And all I've done is maybe put it into a model saying, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, your company's thriving, you're doing great. And you may say, well, what am I doing great? Well, I don't know. But now what I'm trying to say is basically you're probably doing all these things right here. So I end the program the way we started with an action plan. So hopefully you have your what, you know, the you is the me, and then the when, and we'll hopefully open it up here, Dawn. It's about 1:45, so I think you got 15 minutes or so. Hopefully you have questions. You'll learn more from each other than you'll ever learn from me. That's my information up there. It's been my honor, my pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. So Dawn, thank you very much for all that you do in the Chamber of Commerce, and Katie for coordinating this.
Yeah, awesome. I'm wondering, anybody that's out there, I mean, I love how you've tied some of the themes of the different books together, because I'm familiar with several of them, and you kind of pick and choose and created that great. Actually, it was very cool. Does anybody have questions? You can write them in the chat, or if you would like to hit *6, you can do that and do it verbally if you'd like. I think Greg covered an awful lot of information, like you said, very quickly, and it might be helpful to ask some questions.
This is the participation part of the workshop. And Katie, I'm sure you and Dawn are going to share the PowerPoint slides. So they're
Yes.
yours. And there's a lot of this on my website as well. So hopefully you'll go visit that.
Yeah. Greg, I'm curious. So how long have you been doing this? I'm sorry. I probably read it and I don't remember it.
Well, off and on about 20 plus years,
Okay.
AP for 15 years, and worked for our governor for 4. Worked for another Fortune 500 company, and that's where I was hired by a great leader and fired by a great manager. Not a bad person, a good person, but just a scary bright manager and not the best leader. But had it not been for that situation, it would have never prompted me to really think about a story that changed my life. You know, are you laying brick or are you building a cathedral? And I did research on that, and that was the impetus and the genesis for the first book. Building Cathedrals, A Power of Purpose, and that led to the second and the third one. So for the last 7-8 years, I've been doing the motivational speaking and training. So I hopefully have found what I call my unique ability, and we talk about that in the book Traction. There's the G, the W, the C. And the book Traction talks about before you hire someone, you better make sure they have G, W, C. The G is they get it. They get your vision. They get your mission. The W is they want it. That's the passion to work for your business. And the third one is the C. That's the capacity to do the job. Very often what happens is we hire people on the C, the capacity to do the job, but they really don't get it. They may want it because they need a job. They want to jump in there, but they really don't get it. And I've been guilty of not only hiring people that didn't have the G, I've been guilty of accepting a job that I didn't have the G. So for me, the unique ability, if you hire people with their unique ability, they're going to have the G, the W, the C. And it took me basically being fired from corporate America to find my G, my W, my C, and my unique ability. And, you know, praise the Lord. That's what I'm doing right now. And I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. Other questions, comments?
I actually do have a question. So you gave that stair step of the form and storm and things like that. I mean, I know that it takes time to do that, but in a typical time frame, I mean, nothing's probably typical in this scenario, but let's say you have turnover change, or like you said, you have bring somebody in to help change your training program or do something like that. Is there a typical time frame, or I guess best practices to look for?
Good question. I don't think there is typical time change. You know, I'm glad you're here. I look forward to working with you. I know your background, but as soon as you joined the chamber, you took the chamber back down to form. And that's good.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought.
And every time there's a change. So guess what? And I've worked with Ron. Ron's a great leader, and he does this. What you do, we get so busy as a manager and as leaders too, but we get so busy managing the business, we forget to lead the people. And what happens is if you hired Greg Coker next week at the chamber, then I just took your organization down to form. So ideally, your culture knows the form, storm, norm, perform model. And everyone knows, okay, Greg, I'm glad Greg's here, but guess what? We're back in form again. We're going to get back in the conference room. We do it every time we hire someone. Okay, in the conference room, folks, guess what? Here's Greg Coker. Here's Greg's background. Here's what Greg's going to do. The number one reason for conflict in teams is lack of role clarity. The number one reason for conflict is Greg Coker is hiring a company and no one's clear on what he's going to do. And then all of a sudden I start stepping on your task and you get conflict with us or whatever. That's what happened in my first job. Not my first job, the one I got fired from. The guy that hired me was very comfortable with ambiguity. And I'm comfortable with ambiguity also. He was more of a leader. He said, Greg, let's just get you in here. You got great background. You're going to do great stuff. Well, guess what? I lost my sponsor. He left. And then I get this guy that was a great manager. Managers are very uncomfortable with ambiguity. And they need very firm task. So guess what? The lack of role clarity for Greg Coker caused conflict with this guy that ended up firing me eventually. He's not a bad guy. I mean, it just, Jim Collins says, get the wrong people off the bus. They don't have to be wrong people. They just aren't fit. So ideally you would get your organization, you get your team in a conference room and say, we're in form. What are the behaviors? And I can send this to anybody out there. I've got a list of behaviors. What's needed in each stage? In the form stage, the number one thing that's needed is mission. Go over mission, vision, goals, objectives. Go through all the standards of the company. Because guess what? We're all back in form. And for Dawn needs to hear it. Greg needs to hear it. But guess what? For your seasoned employees, they haven't heard it in a long time. So go over mission, vision, goals, objectives, all those things, the form. And then say, folks, we're going to go to Storm at some point. It may take a while because I'm going to be nice to Dawn for about a month and she's going to be nice to me, but it's just going to be a matter of time because Dawn and I are a lot alike. Boom, you say something, I say something, all of a sudden I pissed you off. Excuse my French, but and that causes, and that's basically the genesis of my third book called Forgiveness and Reconciliation. Then we're in Storm. We should be able to say, Greg, let's attack issues. Don't attack Dawn. Dawn don't attack Greg. But what happens in teams, we avoid that storm, and very often we avoid it. It'll never go away. So now we're in Storm. So form, storm, norm. How do we get to norm? Then eventually perform. So as long as your organization knows these dynamics and knows the behaviors that are needed, then I think you're a lot more likely to get to perform quicker. My general thought is most organizations out there are stuck in form or storm. There are a few organizations in norm and perform. And the reason is because they don't feel comfortable going through storm. Storm does not mean beating each other up. Storm means it's called a conflict continuum. Google the conflict continuum. And that's by the guy, that's the guy that wrote the book, the 5 characteristics or the 5 dysfunctions of a team. But just Google the conflict continuum. It's a nice little continuum that what he says is in the middle is where you need to be. On one end is what he calls artificial harmony. And then on the far end is basically beating each other up. What's needed and what most organizations reside is more in artificial harmony. It's fake. It's, hi, how you doing? When you really go, what needs to be more 5, but we're attacking issues, not people. Great questions, Dawn. Other thoughts out there? Other questions, comments?
We have had some comments from James Flynn. Role confusion can cause lots of problems. That's why onboarding and induction is so important. And once you go through those stages, reteaching and reaffirming value, mission, vision, beliefs, and goals on a regular basis.
Excellent point. And I tell you what, the younger generation, the millennials, and they're a lot better at onboarding and orientation than the older generation. And I'm a social scientist, so I'm 55 years old. I'll pick on me, but I'm not picking on anybody else. Is we want to just, hey, Greg, glad you're here. Hey, oh, by the way, I got to be in Louisville in a couple hours. If you need anything, Dawn will take care of you. Hey, we'll get together next week. How many have been oriented that way? a lot of us. That's horrible. A real onboarding orientation experience should probably take 3 or 4 weeks versus 3 or 4 minutes. So excellent point. Whoever said that, dead on. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Other thoughts, comments?
None so far from the chat. Oh, one more comment. Open, honest communication is foundational. It includes disclosure or discourse and sometimes conflict. This leads to trust, common commitment, accountability, and focus on the right actions and results.
Mm-hmm. Strong. Excellent. Excellent comment. We got 6 more minutes. Come on. We're on a roll now. Other thoughts, comments, in closing?
No more?
No more.
Okay. Well, we finished a little early, so Greg, thank you we got the gift of time for everyone, 5 whole minutes. And I do want to say thank you again for joining us for today's session. And Greg, the time that you put into an effort to putting in this presentation, I appreciate it. And like we've said before, this recording will be available in the Business at its Best library, accessible through your partnership login portal. And we sure hope that you will be able to join us next week. We have another Business at its Best on June 11th with Josh Gossett on cybersecurity awareness training. And again, also thank you to Graves Gilbert Clinic for the sponsorship. Again, we can't do our events without our sponsors, so we really appreciate that support. And of course, the support of all of our partners. So thank you so much. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you again, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.